The sun was dropping behind the roof lines, turning the whole street the color of honey. I was leaning against the warm, dark metal of my car, and she stood close enough that I could smell fresh-cut grass and something sweeter underneath it. Her hand came to rest flat on my chest. Mine found the doorframe, still holding the heat of the day. Her keys hung from one finger, a small, carved robin swinging against them. For one breath there was almost nothing between us, her mouth a whisper from mine. Then I made myself step back. She only smiled, quiet and certain, almost amused, and said, "You'll be mine eventually. My name is Ben Walsh, and I was 34 years old the spring she moved in across the street. I live in Franklin, Tennessee, on a quiet road where the maples arch over the asphalt and everybody waves whether they know you or not. I have a small house, a smaller mortgage, and a garage I spend more time in than any room with a bed. That garage is where I work now. I fix old houses, rotted porches, sagging door frames, windows that haven't opened since the Clinton years. I bring them all back. It's honest work, and it doesn't ask me to trust anyone. It wasn't always what I did. For most of my 20s I was an architect at a firm in Nashville, the kind of place with glass walls and a lobby designed to make you feel small. I was good at it. I was going somewhere. And then, over a couple of years, I kept getting in the way of my own career, arguing to save buildings the firm had already sold on tearing down. They stopped bringing me to the good meetings. Eventually, I stopped waiting to be invited and walked out with a truck full of tools and no plan at all. My wife didn't come with me. Vanessa had married the architect, the rising one, and when the rising stopped, she found she'd rather not stay for the rest. We didn't have children. There wasn't much to divide. She took the life she wanted, and I took the quiet, and for a long time after that I kept the quiet, the way some men keep a dog, close and fed, and useful for keeping strangers off the porch. So I lived alone, by choice. I told myself it was peace. Some mornings it even was. My days had a shape I could have set a watch by. Coffee before dawn, the radio low. The shop by 6. I'd take whatever work the week brought, a set of cabinets for somebody in Brentwood, a staircase that needed its spindles turned, and I'd lose myself in it until the light went. In the evenings I cooked for one and slept alone in a house that never asked me for anything. It was a small life, and I'd built the walls of it on purpose, and if it was lonely I'd stopped being able to tell loneliness apart from safety. They'd worn the same face for so long. The one thing I carried out of the old life that had nothing to do with the old life was the carving. My grandfather taught me when I was a boy, sitting on his back steps with a pocket knife and a block of basswood, showing me how to find the shape already hiding in the grain. He only ever made one thing: robins. Little wooden robins, no bigger than the palm of your hand, chest puffed, head cocked like they'd just heard something interesting. I make them still. They're scattered all over the shop, on the windowsill, on the bench, on top of the paint cans. Dozens of them, like the place is quietly nesting. Then came the spring, and the truck with Ohio plates, and Julia Dalton. She bought the old 2-story across the street, the one that had been empty so long the yard had gone to seed. Within a week there were ladders against it and a dumpster in the drive, and within a month there was a sign going up over an empty storefront downtown with her name on it and the word bakery underneath. She'd come south to open a bakery. That was the story, and it was true. I first met her on a Tuesday, when she crossed the street in flour-dusted jeans and knocked on my open garage door. She said she'd heard I was the one to ask about old houses. Her front porch, she said, felt like it was thinking about giving up. I remember 2 things about that first conversation. The first is the way she smelled: cinnamon and coffee and warm bread, a whole kitchen following her across the road, so different from the cedar, sawdust, and varnish of my shop that standing between the two was like standing on a line. The second is the way she looked at me. Not the way you look at a stranger you're asking a favor of. She looked at me the way you look at someone you've already forgiven for something. though I couldn't have told you what. I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself a lot of things that spring. I went over that first Saturday to look at the porch, and I ended up staying the better part of the day. The wood was worse than she'd feared. 2 of the joists had gone soft as bread, and the bottom step gave a little sigh every time you set weight on it. I could have quoted her a number and sent someone from town. Instead, I found myself saying I'd handle it myself, on weekends, and she found herself saying that sounded fine, and neither of us examined too closely why a man who guarded his time like a miser had just given away his Saturdays. So that became the shape of things. Most weekends, through that spring and into the summer, I was on Julia's porch, or up a ladder at her windows, or on my knees at the base of her front steps with a chisel and a bag of shims. The house had good bones under all that neglect, and bringing it back was the kind of slow, forgiving work I'd come to love. Nothing to prove, nobody watching, just wood telling you the truth, if you were patient enough to listen. She had a rhythm, and after a while I learned it. She'd be up before the sun, gone to the bakery in the dark, back by early afternoon, with her sleeves still dusted white. Around 3 she'd come out with 2 mugs of coffee and whatever hadn't sold, and we'd sit on the half-finished steps and not talk about anything that mattered. The bread was still warm most days. She'd tear a loaf in half with her hands and give me the bigger piece without asking, the way you do with someone you've decided to feed whether they like it or not. The work itself gave us an excuse, and I was grateful for it. A man can say a great deal to a woman while he's replacing a windowsill that he could never say sitting across a table from her. I learned that she'd grown up in Ohio, that her mother was gone, that she'd wanted her own bakery since she was small and had spent 10 years working in other people's kitchens to earn it. She learned that I used to draw buildings for a living and didn't anymore, and she didn't push on the didn't anymore, which I noticed, because most people push. The neighbors started to expect my car at her curb on Saturdays. Old Mr. Pruitt, 2 doors down, told me it was about time I found something better to do with my weekends than sanding things that were already smooth. I told him to mind his roses. He grinned like he'd won something. There's a smell to that kind of restoration that I'll always tie to her now. The sharp, clean bite of primer drying on my hands, the oil I worked into old hinges until doors that had shrieked for a decade swung silent, the particular sweetness of sawdust from wood that's been in the sun. Underneath all of it, always, the bakery smell that came off her hair. I'd catch myself breathing it in over a workbench and have to remind myself what I was supposed to be doing. That was the summer my hands started to know her house better than my own. I want to be honest about how slow it was, because it was slow, and the slowness was the whole point. I wasn't a man who fell. I was a man who calculated the drop and stepped back from the edge, and every single time we got close to something, a look that held a beat too long, her hand brushing mine as she passed a mug, a joke that landed a little too soft, I stepped back, made an excuse, remembered a tool I'd left in the truck. She saw me do it every time. She never once made me feel bad about it. "You keep backing away," she said one afternoon, not unkindly, watching me invent a reason to stand up. "That's all right. I'm not in a hurry." I didn't know what to do with a person who wasn't in a hurry. Vanessa had wanted everything at a run, the wedding, the house, the version of me that photographed well. Julia just kept showing up with coffee and letting the silence be comfortable, and that patience did something to my defenses that pressure never could have. It's hard to keep your guard up against someone who isn't attacking. You just get tired, eventually, of holding the shield, and I was getting tired. I could feel it happening even as I fought it. The slow erosion of a man's reasons for keeping a woman at arm's length when she keeps handing him coffee and asking nothing back. The thing that stayed with me, the thing I couldn't shake, I found on a Thursday in June. I'd carried a pane of glass into her front room to measure it against the window, and while she went to find her checkbook, I stood there in the quiet and let my eyes wander the way they do. And there, on the sill of the bay window, catching the last of the afternoon light, was a small carved wooden robin, chest puffed, head cocked, no bigger than the palm of my hand. I picked it up before I could stop myself. I knew that bird. I don't mean it looked like the kind I made. I mean, I knew it. The particular set of the wings, the way the tail came to a point, the little notch under the beak that was almost a signature. My hands had made that notch 1,000 times. Standing in a stranger's front room, I felt the floor tilt under me, a déjà vu so strong it was almost sickness, and no memory at all to hang it on. "Where did you get the little bird?" I asked. When she came back, something crossed her face, there and gone. She just smiled. "Someone kind gave it to me a long time ago." I waited for more. There wasn't any more. She took the robin gently out of my hand, set it back exactly where it had been, told me the window looked wonderful, and asked if I wanted more coffee. And because I was a coward about the things that mattered, I let her change the subject. I told myself there were probably 100 men in Tennessee who carved robins. I told myself the notch was a coincidence. I didn't believe any of it, and I looked away anyway. For days after that I found excuses to look at the sill again, and the robin was always there, patient as she was, watching the street with its head cocked like it knew something I didn't. Twice I opened my mouth to ask her straight out, "Who gave it to you? When? Where?" And twice I closed it, because some part of me understood that the answer would change everything, and I wasn't ready yet to be changed. That was the summer she'd say the thing I still hear when I close my eyes. It was an evening in July, the light gone gold and heavy, the whole street the color of honey. I'd finished for the day and was loading tools into the car parked at her curb, and she came out to see me off the way she'd taken to doing. I don't remember what we were laughing about. I remember that we ended up standing too close, her by the open door, me with my back against the warm metal, and for once I didn't step back fast enough. Her hand came up to my chest. My grip found the door frame. The evening went very quiet, and in that quiet I felt the old fear rise up hard, the one that says everyone who gets close eventually decides you're not worth staying for, and I stepped back. She only smiled, certain, almost amused, and said the words, that I'd be hers eventually. And I did what I always did. I made my jaw go hard, and I said something about the hour, and I got in the car and drove the length of one very short street to my own house, and I sat in my own dark driveway for a while, holding the steering wheel, listening to my own heartbeat call me a fool. She'd said it like a fact, not a hope, a fact she was willing to wait out. And the terrible thing, the thing I couldn't admit even to myself yet, was how much of me wanted her to be right. Vanessa came back in the fall. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years. She showed up on a Saturday in October in a car that cost more than my house, and she got out of it like she was stepping onto a stage. Whatever had come after me, the wealthier man, the bigger life she'd traded up for, had apparently come apart, though she'd never have used those words. She said she'd been thinking about me. She said the divorce had been a mistake we were both too proud to fix. She said all of it standing in my driveway at a volume the whole street could enjoy, because Vanessa had never in her life had a private feeling she didn't want an audience for. I told her, as gently as I could manage, that there was nothing to fix, that I'd moved on, and her eyes went past me, across the road, to the house with the fresh paint and the good porch, and the woman I clearly hadn't moved on alone. I should have known then that I'd made a mistake letting her see it. Because Vanessa didn't leave. She stayed in town a few days, at a hotel off the interstate, and she did what she'd always done best, which was gather information and sharpen it into something with an edge. And somewhere in those few days, she walked into a bakery she had no reason to visit and introduced herself to Julia. I don't know everything that was said between them. I know a little, from both sides, pieced together after. I know Vanessa came in smiling, all warmth, asking questions the way a friend would. And I know that Julia, who did not have a dishonest bone in her body, answered them honestly, even the ones that were traps. Because there was one question underneath all the others, and Vanessa circled it until she could ask it plainly, whether Julia had really come to Franklin by chance. And Julia, I can see her doing it. Both hands flat on the counter, chin level, didn't lie. She said no. She said she had chosen this town and this street on purpose. She said she'd known about me for a long time. That was all Vanessa needed. She didn't need the rest of the story. She only needed the shape of it. And the shape, told coldly, in the wrong voice, sounded like something terrible. She came to my garage that same evening, and this time she wasn't loud. That was how I knew it was serious. Vanessa Quiet was Vanessa aiming. She didn't move here by accident, Ben, she said, leaning in the doorway, arms crossed. I want you to hear that from me before you fall any further. That woman across the street planned this. She admitted it to my face. She's been circling you for years, and she let you believe it was chance. She let you believe you found her. She let it sit. Doesn't that scare you? A person who could want something that long, that quietly, and build a whole life across the street from you just to get it? That's not love. That's a hunt. I stood there with a chisel in my hand and didn't say anything, and she watched the words do their work on my face, and she'd always been good at reading my face. Here is the thing I'm least proud of in this whole story. It worked. Not because Vanessa was honest. She wasn't. She'd taken something true and dipped it in poison. But because she'd found the exact crack that was already in me. For years, she was proof. Proof that the people who get close eventually decide you were a means to an end. And now here was another woman who, it turned out, had wanted something from me before I'd even known her name. The word years kept turning over in my head. Years. I didn't remember her from years ago. I didn't remember her at all. So, what did she know about me that I didn't know about her? What had I been to her before I was anything? I went cold. I'm ashamed of how fast I went cold. That night I lay awake and argued with myself in the dark. Part of me, the sensible, scarred part, laid it all out like a case file. The deliberate move, the long silence, the way she deflected every time I asked about the bird. It looked, from a certain cold angle, exactly like Vanessa had painted it. But there was another part, quieter, that kept snagging on the same detail, worrying it like a loose thread. If Julia had wanted to trap me, she'd had 100 chances to close the trap. A woman running a scheme doesn't spend a whole summer handing you the bigger half of the bread and letting you leave whenever your nerve failed. A hunter doesn't wait that gently, but I was tired, and fear is louder than reason at 2 a.m, and I let the cold part win because the cold part had kept me safe before. The next Saturday I didn't go to her porch. I texted something about being busy. The one after that I did the same. I saw her lights come on in the dark each morning and go dark again. Saw her car come and go, and I kept my own door shut and told myself I was being careful. Careful was the lie I'd always been able to live inside. What made it worse was that she let me have the silence. She didn't text. She didn't leave notes. She didn't stand in her yard looking wounded so I'd have to feel it from across the road. She just went on living her patient life, opening the bakery in the dark, coming home in the afternoon, her porch light burning steady every evening, like a thing that had decided to stay lit whether or not I ever crossed to it again. A guiltier man would have taken that steadiness as innocence. I took it, in my worst days, as proof of how long she was willing to wait me out, and I hated myself a little for how the same fact could be read 2 such different ways depending on how afraid you were. Every one of those mornings I passed the robins in my own shop. Dozens of them, on the sill, on the bench, and every one of them seemed to be looking at me sideways, asking the question I wouldn't ask her. I'd made that bird on her windowsill. I knew it the way you know your own handwriting. And a man doesn't give a stranger something he made with his own hands. Somewhere, sometime, I had given that bird to somebody. The not remembering was starting to feel less like a mystery and more like a locked door I'd chosen not to open. I did go to the bakery once, that stretch, because I couldn't help it. I stood in the doorway in the slant of autumn light, flower dust hanging gold in the air between us, and she looked up from the counter and saw my face and understood everything without a word. Her hands found the edge of the counter and held it, knuckles going white, the only thing about her that moved. She didn't rush to explain, she didn't chase me down the sidewalk with reasons, she just looked at me steadily and said, "I won't lie to make this easier. But she's telling it wrong." And when I didn't answer, when I couldn't, she let me go. She let me walk out. That was the difference between them, laid bare, and I was too far into my own fear right then to see it for the gift it was. It was Julia who finally opened the door, though she did it without saying a word to me at all. She left something on my step. I found it on a gray morning at the end of that long, silent week, a small paper bag from the bakery, the kind she used for a single roll. Inside there was no roll. Inside was the robin. I stood in my doorway with it in my palm and felt the whole shape of my life shift a quarter inch. The wood was worn smooth, smoother than any of mine, the finish gone soft at the wings from years of being held. 9 years of being held, though I didn't know the number yet. I only knew that this bird had been carried and touched and kept until the grain had gone to satin, and that I had made it, and that the making of it was suddenly right there behind a door in my memory, rattling to be let out. I crossed the street. I didn't knock. She opened before I reached it, like she'd been watching, and we stood on her good porch in the cold with the bird between us. "You were the girl at the house on Delmore Street," I said. Not a question. Something in her let go, and she nodded. And then I remembered all of it, the way you remember a dream someone describes back to you. 9 years ago, a junior nobody at the firm, sent out to a storm-damaged house the developers wanted gone so they could have the lot. Everyone had already written it off, but I'd gone through it room by room and found it sound under the water damage, salvageable, worth saving, and I'd spent 2 weeks of my own nights drawing up what it could be so the family had something real to fight the demolition order with. I remembered an old woman who baked while I worked, filling the place with cinnamon so it wouldn't smell like ruin, and I remembered her granddaughter, quiet, wrecked, sitting on the stairs watching the only place that still held her grandmother almost get taken away. I'd carved a robin at the workbench one evening to have something to do with my hands, and on my last day, I'd pressed it into that girl's palm and told her the house was going to be all right. And then I'd moved on to the next job and the next life, and I had never once looked back. "You saved the only place that still had my grandmother in it," Julia said, quiet, steady, the words worn as smooth as the bird from all the years she'd carried them. "You didn't have to. Nobody asked you to, and nobody paid you, and you did it anyway. And then you gave me this and disappeared before I could even say your name." She looked down at the robin in my hand. I never stopped hoping I'd get to say thank you. She told me the rest simply, holding nothing back now, that she'd grown up and built her life and never quite forgotten the kind stranger who'd saved her grandmother's house. That 2 years ago she'd heard, through the long grapevine that ties old towns together, that the architect from Delmore Street had left his firm and his marriage and moved to Franklin, that she'd been saving for her own bakery for a decade and could have opened it anywhere. On purpose, and that she'd never planned to hide it forever, only to let it become something on its own before she handed me a story that big. "Both things are true," she said. "I really did come to open the bakery, and I really did come because of you. I never lied to you, Ben. I just didn't lead with the part that would have scared you off in a week." And there it was, the difference, standing in front of me in the cold. Vanessa had taken a true thing and made it ugly. Julia had simply let a true thing be true and trusted me to catch up to it. I looked at her standing there in the cold, both hands wrapped around a mug she'd brought out without thinking, steam curling up between us, and I understood how badly I'd almost thrown it away. She hadn't wanted anything from me that a decent man wouldn't be honored to give. She'd wanted to say thank you. She'd wanted, if I let her, to love the person that kindness had come from. And she'd been willing to wait 9 years and cross 1,000 miles and rebuild a rotting house across the street from mine for the mere chance of it, and to hold that chance so lightly that she'd let me walk away twice rather than force it into the light before I was ready. I thought about all the Saturdays, all the coffee, all the times she'd watched me back away and just said, "Easy," that she wasn't in a hurry. This was what she'd been patient about, not a scheme. A thank you 9 years in the making, and under it, a hope she'd been brave enough to hold, and gentle enough to never once force on me. I closed my hand around the robin. The fire was going inside. I could hear it crackling through the open door, the only sound on that whole cold street. "I've spent years avoiding this," I said. "I've gotten good at it. I've turned it into a personality." She almost smiled. "I don't want to avoid you. I'm tired of being careful about the one thing that was ever worth being brave for." Vanessa was gone by the next morning. There was nothing left in Franklin for a person like her once the poison stopped working. I never had to say much to her at all. Some doors just close on their own once you stop holding them open. We didn't rush it, even then. After all that, you might think we fell into each other overnight, but that wasn't our way, and it wasn't hers. What changed wasn't the speed. What changed was that I stopped stepping back. That winter was made of small things. Coffee on the good porch, colder now, our breath showing. Me finishing the work I'd been dragging out all summer, because finishing it had felt like ending an excuse to be near her, and discovering I didn't need the excuse anymore. Her teaching me to knead bread with my carpenter's hands, laughing at how I overworked the dough the way I overworked everything. Me showing her how to find the shape hiding in a block of basswood, her first robin coming out lopsided and beloved. I learned her the way I'd learned her house, slowly, with my hands, until I knew where every board would creak. I learned that she hummed without knowing it when she was happy, some tune from her grandmother's kitchen she couldn't have named. I learned that she took her coffee too sweet and pretended she didn't. I learned that the patience I'd mistaken for something almost unnatural was just a person who decided, a long time ago, what mattered to her, and had never once been talked out of it. And she learned me too, the whole thorny map of me, the places I still flinched, the questions I couldn't answer yet. She never pushed on the flinching. She'd just wait at the edge of it, the way she'd waited at the edge of everything, until I found my own way across. The fear didn't vanish. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect these stories to end with the wound just gone, and that's not how wounds go. There were mornings that winter I'd wake up and feel the old cold reach for me, the reflex that said, "This too will leave. Protect yourself now." The difference was that I'd learned where it came from, and I'd learned it was a liar. So I'd get up and cross the street, and there she'd be with the lights already on, and the cold would let go of me a little more each time, until one day I noticed it had stopped coming at all. Spring came back around, the way it does, and then it was a full year since the truck with the Ohio plates. Then it was more than that. The bakery found its feet, and then some. There were mornings a line ran out the door and down the block, 150 people a weekend, all of them there for bread made by the most patient person I have ever known. I did the build-out on the shop myself, every shelf and counter, and carved a small robin into the underside of the register where only she'd ever find it. She found it the first day. She didn't say anything. She just came and kissed me in front of a room full of customers, flour on both of us, and went back to work. Time did the thing time does. When you finally stop bracing against it, it went soft and quick and generous. One season folded into the next. The town that had been a place I hid in became a place I belonged to, mostly because she belonged to it and I belonged to her. People stopped calling it Julia's Bakery and my shop as if they were two different addresses. Somewhere in there I stopped thinking of myself as a man recovering from a life and started thinking of myself as a man living one. I moved my tools into her garage eventually, and then myself into her house, the one I'd spent a summer bringing back to life without understanding I was building it for us. It's a good house. The porch doesn't sigh anymore. the windows all open. On winter nights, the fire I'd only ever heard through a doorway is the fire we sit in front of, and it throws its light across the mantel, and on the mantel there are 2 wooden robins. One of them is worn nearly smooth, the finish soft at the wings, older than our whole story, the one I carved at 25 for a wrecked girl on a staircase, and forgot I'd ever made. She keeps it in the center, where the light finds it first. Next to it is a newer one. I carved it the winter everything changed, sat at her kitchen table with a pocket knife and a block of basswood and my grandfather's lesson in my hands, and made the best robin I've ever made, chest puffed, head cocked, that little notch under the beak that was always almost a signature. I set it beside the old one so they'd have company. 2 little birds on the mantel now. One I carved at 25. Before I knew anything. One I carved for us, once I finally did. Some evenings I catch her looking at the pair of them, and I know what she's thinking, because I'm thinking it too, that it's a strange and lucky thing, how long a small kindness can travel before it comes home, that she carried one of those birds for 9 years, across a whole life to set it on a mantel 3 feet from the man who made it, that the same hands made both, 9 years and 1 whole heartbreak apart. And somehow, it was always going to be this table, this fire, this street. I asked her once, on one of those evenings, whether she'd ever doubted it, in all those years, whether she'd ever thought she was being a fool for building her whole life around a stranger and a wooden bird. She thought about it a while, the way she thought about everything, honestly. Then she said no. She said she'd never once believed she was owed me. She'd only believed that some kindnesses deserve a life spent finding their way back to the person who gave them, and that if that took 9 years, then it took 9 years, and the waiting had never felt like waiting to her. It had just felt like walking towards something she could already see. Turns out she was right. It just took me the long way around. I used to think the long way around was a failure, proof that I was slow, or scared, or too broken to do the brave thing when it was in front of me. I don't think that anymore. I think some people arrive at their whole life all at once, and some of us have to walk the long road to it, and the road doesn't make the life any less ours when we finally get there. She waited on the far end of that road without ever once telling me to hurry. I'll spend the rest of it trying to be worth the wait. For years I thought avoiding love was how I kept myself safe. I built a quiet life and called the walls peace. I got so good at stepping back from the edge that I mistook the stepping back for wisdom. And the whole time, this is the part that still stops me when I let it, the whole time, love had already found me. It had found me 9 years earlier, in a storm-damaged house that smelled of cinnamon, in the hand of a girl on a staircase I barely looked at twice. It had been walking toward me patiently ever since. I just hadn't finished walking toward it. I think about that a lot now. How close I came to never finishing the walk. How a man can spend so long guarding a door that he forgets he was the one who locked it. And forgets, too, that the person on the other side has been standing there the whole time, not knocking, just waiting, content to let him open it in his own time. That's the thing nobody tells you about being loved quietly. It doesn't need you to notice it to be real. It can wait across a street, across a decade, across every wall you build, and it can hold a small wooden bird until the grain goes soft, and it can still be there, steady, on the day you finally run out of road. I spent years running from love. She spent those same years quietly waiting for me to run out of road. So let me leave you with 2 questions tonight, and I'd truly like to know. Have you ever been loved by someone long before you ever noticed them? And if you'd been standing where I stood, would you have had Julia's patience, or would you have had my fear? If this story moved you, do me a small kindness. Hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me down in the comments, would you have waited 9 years?